I met Rachelle Lyons during a pollution study on the Gale River, and she and her students were doing a lot of testing and so on. She's a research professor of environmental sciences and policy at Plymouth State University. Some areas of her expertise are food system sustainability, natural resource stewardship, and environmental justice, among others. She and her students have conducted many investigations in these and other related areas. So tonight we're talking about light pollution, and I'm very pleased to introduce the program and turn it over to Rachelle.
Thank you so much, Ivan, and thank you everyone for joining tonight. I was hoping to be doing this with a handful of students, and they may be popping in a little bit later. And I am going to use some features on Zoom and, if possible, on Google, and I'll just put the link to the Google app into the chat. And you do not have to participate with the link to the Google. It's called Jamboard. So it's just a quick way to have some sharing in this remote setting. And it's always fun when people do participate. So I'm plugging that into the chat right now. There we go. And I will turn our attention to it when we are about to use it. And I will also share my screen. This is such a fantastic turnout. I am super happy to see so many people interested in light pollution, which has been something that I have been working on for many years now and involving students with for quite some time. And for most of those years, I had a little bit of trouble recruiting people to start to think about light pollution and see it as something that is significant enough to warrant our time, attention, and energy. I will turn our attention to the link that I put in the Jamboard. If we open that link, it should take us to something that looks like this. Yay, it's working. And it looks like a whiteboard, and there's a little Post-it note in the middle that says, why are you interested in light pollution? Are we seeing all kinds of wonderful responses here? A love of the night sky, impacts on wildlife. A little nod to some of the grief maybe around the idea of dark skies and once being able to see really intense stars that maybe have been dulled. Effects on bird migration. Beautiful. And I'm seeing some fantastic questions here too. The stars do so many amazing things for us, and I appreciate somebody noting the idea that it helps us find our place in the universe, provides wonder, and a nod to all the generations to come in the future and their ability to have the benefit of that wonder and sense of home. This is great. More coming in. Oh my goodness. Experiences with people who have never been able to see a truly dark sky before, which is actually probably most of us, unless we were on the earth before we had electrification of the landscape. So before the 1930s, it's unlikely that we have ourselves experienced truly dark skies. And apparently this topic of light pollution is coming up at Planning Commission meetings in Newbury, Vermont, and that's fantastic to hear. We're paying attention to this. I'm going to advance us to the next slide, and we can do the same thing with the sticky notes. We're using a green sticky note if you'd like to share one thing that you know about light pollution. And then if we could use a blue sticky note, a question that you might have about light pollution. And I'll give everyone a moment to do that. This is fantastic. So we have a shared PowerPoint so that all of the students could be engaging with you in real time. And I hate to say this, but our internet here at the house seems not to be tolerating that much engagement. So I'm gonna move forward without a PowerPoint and use your observations and questions as a bit of a guide until we can maybe get our PowerPoint live again. But these are really wonderful questions to be seeing and hearing that our community is paying attention. I'm going to share my screen again because I do have some other resources that I'll click through. But when we think about light pollution and the impact that it may be having, one really interesting thought exercise is to consider how would your life change if all of a sudden we went from a very predictable period of light during the day and dark during the night to a period of all dark all the time. For this thought exercise, we'll play along and pretend that we'll still have habitable temperature ranges on the planet Earth, and we'll still have food production. But what are some of the ways you might need to change your behaviors and your activities if we no longer had a predictable period of light and instead were immersed in round-the-clock darkness? I would encourage us to click over to frame 4. And again, we can use those sticky notes. What are some ways your routines and behaviors might have to shift? So I originally encountered this thought activity at a conference about artificial light at night. And I found it to be really profound in thinking about just how impactful the electrification of the landscape has been. And humans, along with every other living being, have been evolving for the past about 400 million years with these really predictable cycles of light and dark. And it drives all of our hormone production, our sleep cycles, reproductive behaviors, food foraging behaviors. And just within the last about 125 years, humans and artificial light at night have dramatically changed those predictable periods of light and dark. And humans who rely heavily on sight as their primary sensory perception may have been benefiting. Let me be clear that we're also suffering some consequences, but all of the other organisms are suffering consequences of that dramatic and rapid shift. anyone who has traveled to any of the polar regions has probably experienced just how challenging it is to have some sort of rhythm to when you should be doing very regular things like eating, sleeping. When you lose those relatively normal for this latitude periods of light and dark. So anyone who's been to Alaska during the summertime has probably had the experience of it being close to midnight and you're just starting to think, oh, it's kind of time to end the active period of the day, maybe have some dinner. And then it's nearly impossible for some folks to sleep when we have no darkness. But when we turn that on our head, we can start to really think about just how profound the impacts of artificial light at night have been on the environment. And it's not just animals, it's also plants. And then I'll do one more share, and then I can start to get into some more details about the light pollution situation that we are experiencing now. So I'm going to tab over one more frame to frame 5, and using a sticky note, do you have a nighttime memory that is particularly fond? Do you have any early experiences with the dark? And if you're willing to share on a post-it note. Fireflies. Wow, there are some really amazing experiences in this group. I'm envious of seeing the aurora. And good news, the PowerPoint has finally loaded. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and tolerating my technical difficulties. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to share my screen and we can look at a couple of slides to guide us through answering some of the questions that you posted in the Jamboard and elaborating a little bit more information. And I would like to just note that the background of this particular slide is an image that was taken by one of my students just this past weekend. Anyone who has gotten a relatively new iPhone or technology to be able to capture nighttime images has improved by leaps and bounds, and it's absolutely phenomenal to see what you can capture just with an iPhone. And I just wanted to say thank you to Ammonoosuc Conservation Trust for hosting myself and my students tonight. This was just a blurb from the advertisement for this evening's session. And here's an image of the small group of students that have been studying light pollution over the past 5 weeks. We were able to take a trip up the Eastern Seaboard and do a couple of light pollution readings along the way. And what we'll cover in the next about 25 minutes is a little background to flesh out the extent of light pollution and some of the trends that we're seeing. Different types of light pollution, some of the ecological impacts of artificial light at night, some of the impacts to human health, and then we'll turn our attention to what can be done and what will we as members of communities in the North Country maybe commit to doing. And we've already done some of these warm-up activities. Thank you so much for sharing your night sky memories. So very recently, just last month, actually, January of 2023, there was a publication in the journal Nature that quantified some of the shifts in the illumination of our landscape. So light pollution is skyrocketing is a pretty startling headline. But this research actually found that there's been a 10% increase in sky glow each year. So these are really big shifts in very, very short periods of time. And this short article, and I'm happy to share links to these articles that I'm sure can be made available to anyone who's interested. But these, this shorter article, it's only about 2 pages, talks about some of the trends, and it's a very easy read, and it's a fantastic read to share with anyone that you are trying to convince that light pollution is something that we might want to start paying attention to. And it's really drawing on a longer article that was published in the same edition of the journal Nature. But this was a report on the last about 12 years of a citizen science project known as Globe at Night. So this project has global scale reach. Citizens from around the world are able to easily and readily participate. And this is where we were able to see that sky glow, and basically the washing out of stars in the night sky has been increasing tremendously, 7 to 10% increase per year. And then I wanted to introduce another tool. So this is a light pollution map, and this is just a screenshot. I'm going to take you now to the actual tool. Oops. And we can also add a link to this so that you'll be able to explore it on your own. I'm going to put a link in the chat right now if you wanted to check this out. Here we go. I'll share my screen again. So here we have the zoomed out view of this interactive map that shows relative levels of light pollution around the world. And I'm going to zoom us in to our particular region. And there is a legend in the right-hand corner. But essentially, the warmer the colors, so as you move from black into dark blue to the other end of the spectrum to yellow, orange, and red, it's an indication of an increasing intensity in light pollution. So I've zoomed in, and we should be able to pick out the outline of New Hampshire here. You can see the Eastern Seaboard, New York City, Boston, Montreal, pretty intense light pollution. Not a surprise, but I'm going to zoom us in a little bit more to our region. We can see Plymouth right here, Plymouth State University. We'll zoom in more and more. And then we have Littleton right up here. Zoom in a bit more. And we can see that even here in what might be considered rural northern New Hampshire, there are still places with pretty intense and pretty significant light pollution. Is there anything on here that surprises you or prompts some curiosity or questions as we look at this light pollution map of our region?
What's the best way for people to put their questions into you, Rachelle? Would you prefer unmuting or in the chat?
I think because we have a rather large group, unmuting might be kind of intimidating or at least difficult for people to know. So maybe we can put it right in the chat.
Great. I'm happy to just keep an eye on that and just bring that up to you if you'd like.
Super helpful.
So if you guys, yeah, sure. If you guys have responses to Rachelle's questions, please just put them in the chat. in the bottom of your screen. You can type that, just make sure it goes to everyone so that I can see it, and then I'd be happy to read that out loud as we start to bring things in.
I'm going to zoom out a tiny bit to give us some more perspective.
I think as people are maybe typing, I'm happy to pop things in. Oh, here we go. From Emma. When it was all the way zoomed out, we saw a large swath of light in northwestern Canada. What was that?
Ooh, northwestern Canada. Unfortunately, I don't have much insight into the conditions in Canada. I don't know. But the beauty of this map is that when we zoom in, we can click on any pixel and it will actually open up and give us a little bit more information. And if you see on the right-hand side on the navigation bar, you can open layers to provide more information and remove layers. So this, I really love this tool, and it is managed by volunteers. And we are using the free version. So if we wanted to support some of this research, we could certainly subscribe to the, and it's very minimal expense to have an ad-free version. But I do not know the answer, and I would have to spend more time exploring that.
There's a comment here from Chris saying Berlin to Conway seems very bright. And short of a question, I think, what is causing that brightness?
That is oftentimes pretty surprising when we start to look at that. Does anyone have any guesses about what may be going on in Berlin? If we zoom in, we can see really intense light pollution in Berlin.
Not getting any guesses. I'm gonna guess maybe the prison.
Absolutely. Yep. So that's one of the things that often doesn't come to mind, but prisons in Berlin is not the only place where there is a prison. We keep them illuminated around the clock, very brightly. And then the other patterns that we see are areas of development. And one of the areas of development where we see a lot of illumination and not necessarily efficient illumination are in parking lots and car dealerships.
We got both of those guesses in the chat, so gold stars to those folks. Yes, there is a question also about what is being used to measure the light pollution.
Oh, fantastic. So I'm going to close out of this. I'll go back to the PowerPoint because we do have a slide about some of the measurement techniques. And there's a handful of different ways that light pollution is being measured. There's pros and cons to all of them, of course. And then we will introduce a tool that is really easy for any of you to use on your own, so that you can also be contributing some data to the ongoing research around light pollution. So let me switch back real quick here. And here we go, full screen again. So when we think about light pollution and the sources of light pollution, it's important for us to also consider different sources and ways that we can minimize the negative impacts and really optimize the benefits that we are trying to get from artificial light at night. And the research that I shared with you at the beginning and how the 10% increase in sky glow is really what we were looking at in those earlier research example. So sky glow is what washes out the stars, but there's a few other types of light pollution that are important for us to name so that we can begin to build the vocabulary for making some change. So light trespass is the idea of light that is being provided, say, in a car sales parking lot. And that light isn't contained just to that particular parking lot. It extends far beyond the bounds of the parking lot, and perhaps it even illuminates the yards or through the windows of residents that might be near a prison or I'm so sorry, can't think of the word for a place where you sell cars, a car dealership, thank you. And then we can think of clutter. So light clutter would be similar to driving down a really developed street where there's a lot of businesses that have signs that are illuminated from the inside. So those internally lit signs. And we see those pretty much in any developed town. And then you add on layers of lights for illuminating entryways, lights for controlling the flow of traffic, street lights. When you start to have all of these layers on top of one another, the light is actually really cluttering. And I think that that's an important word for us to consider, because that cluttered light starts to become really distressing, and it's almost like being in a place that is very noisy. It's the equivalent of a lot of noise to our eyes. So it can be really disorienting and really distracting, and we get into a bit of a race or a competition where the next sign that goes up has to be brighter than the other signs, because there is a relativity to the brightness. And then there's another concept of glare, and that's where the light is directed in such a way that it actually renders us unable to see. So we've all experienced this probably driving at night when someone has their high beams, or some of our newer vehicles that have really, really bright headlights just hit our eyes in exactly the right way, and it renders us unable to see. And then we have over illumination, and that's something that we see a lot of times on sports fields. So Plymouth State University has some room to improve with this example. We have some beautiful turf fields that are illuminated, oftentimes round the clock, even when they're not being used. And then we can look at this graphic in the lower right-hand corner, and we can think about how the types of light fixtures can effectively illuminate an area and provide useful light, or they can contribute to that sky glow, the light trespass, the clutter, and the glare. So open light fixtures that just scatter light in every direction are probably the most offensive, contributing most of the sky glow and the light trespass. But simply by directing that light more exacting to where we are trying to illuminate, where that light can actually be of benefit rather than detriment, is a relatively easy way to reduce those negative impacts, but also achieve some better efficiency. So reducing the amount of light that we need can also reduce the amount of electricity it takes to provide that light. And a lot of the conversation about light pollution has come from the astronomy field, and many very talented folks have been working on this for decades. And I think we have an opportunity here to really partner with astronomers and their passion for the night sky and the stars and the celestial bodies, to start to think about how can we frame this conversation where we reach beyond just the loss of stars and start to appeal to other reasons why we might want to be paying more attention and investing more energy into remedying the detrimental impacts of artificial light at night. So there's lots of studies that correlate human health to conditions of light pollution. So light pollution has been connected to occurrence of cancer, occurrence of depression, disruption in sleep patterns, and persistent elevated levels of cortisol, so that stress hormone. And then we can think about the impacts of light pollution on the environment. So we see impacts on trees and plants, no surprise, have a very tight relationship as autotrophs with the sun. And then we can also see impacts on wildlife. So earlier this evening, many of you identified the impacts of artificial light at night for causing confusion to migrating birds, but also sea turtles, salamanders, frogs, and many of those organisms that have a springtime migration. And then we also see tremendous impacts on insect populations. And insect populations are really the foundation of the food chain. So anytime we have artificial light at night, even though we may not see the very direct impacts on moths, which serve really important roles as nighttime pollinators, we may not see those impacts on beetles and mosquitoes, but the impacts certainly are happening, and they disrupt breeding times and breeding cycles, foraging behaviors. And when we lose insect populations, those ripple effects work their way right through the food web. I think, in the interest of time, I am going to move forward to answer that question about how some of those measurements on that light pollution map were generated. And there's a handful of ways that light pollution is being measured. Some of it is being done through satellites, but there's some limitation to how effective those satellite measurements are, because they are not really intended to be measuring light pollution, and they aren't necessarily measuring the range of light spectrum that's visible to the human eye. So some more exacting ways that we can measure light pollution are with sky quality meters. And this is what my students were using. So these are relatively inexpensive scientific instruments that give us some indication of the intensity of light pollution in a particular location. They run about $100 to $125 per unit, which is not super expensive, but I doubt many hobby astronomers or citizen scientists are going to spend $100 to $125. The beauty of these sky quality meters is that we can calibrate them so that we know each reading is really comparing apples to apples. And they're incredibly simple to use.
There was a quick follow-up about the map, and I don't know if that maybe relates to what you were just talking about, but Cheryl was wondering if the map had anything to do with the Bortle scale. I don't know how exactly that's said, but that's my go at it.
Yes, so the Bortle scale, and I'll introduce that if we have time when we talk about the Globe at Night Citizen Science Project, is really looking at that star magnitude, so the intensity of the stars that we can see. And again, that gets washed out when we have more light pollution. So yes, similar measurements. So my students did some measurements at a couple of different sites along the eastern seaboard. And they found some pretty surprising results. They expected some of our more secluded locations to have far less light pollution than they actually did. But I'm going to move forward to the dark sky meter, which is actually an app that anyone can put on their iPhone. And unfortunately, there's no Android version yet, but you can put the dark sky meter on your iPhone or your iPad. It's not free. I think it's $1.99 to purchase the app. And certainly I would love to see more free resources available so it's more accessible to more people. But this is a relatively easy app to use. It doesn't require any additional gadgets. It's that supercomputer that we all happen to have in our pocket. And the instructions are pretty clear. There's a procedure where you actually have to cover up the camera on your phone before you do a reading. And this is a fantastic way if you wanted to do some readings yourself, to try downloading the Dark Sky Meter app. I hope in the near future that there's a version available for Android phones. So it's worth noting that the higher the number on these readings is a good thing. You want to see higher numbers on your Dark Sky Meter app. And then there's another fantastic project, and this is the project that served as the basis for that article about the skyrocketing light pollution that I showed you at the beginning. So the Globe at Night project has been going on for about 12 years, and you really don't need any special equipment at all to participate in this. You look at couple of star magnitude slides that they show you. So you can print these out and have a hard paper copy, but the star magnitude charts basically show you the various degrees of intensity of light pollution that might be washing out the stars in your particular location. The beauty of this project is that it's so incredibly accessible, and it takes maybe 5 minutes to actually participate in the data collection process. You do need to be able to orient a little bit to find the target constellation for each month. So you can see the dates for 2023. Each month, Globe at Night asks citizen science to participate during a very specific window of time. And that window of time is really intended to be at a period when we won't have a lot of disruption from moonlight. So we just ended the period for the February Globe at Night campaign. But there's another one coming up in March, and I'll be here before you know it. So March 13th through March 22nd, we want to be orienting in the Northern Hemisphere to the constellation of Orion or Gemini. And the instructions for Globe at Night, and again, I'll send a link to this particular project, really just ask you to look at these, I think there's 7 different star magnitude charts, which is basically just a little box that has a couple of black dots representing stars. And as you move up in magnitude, there's more black dots in the box. And they ask you to match your view of the night sky with which box most accurately captures what you are seeing. So it's incredibly simple, and it's really beautiful because you can involve anyone at any age really in this observation. And it happens every month, so there's plenty of opportunity to participate. And this is the project that has been able to document that change over the last little more than a decade, where we see light pollution increasing by about 10% annually. This citizen science project is also really fantastic as a way to start to engage people in the conversation about light pollution, because we have a huge opportunity to make some change. There's good news, and it's not very often that we find such good news and easily accessible solutions to our environmental problems. So our light pollution challenge is one that happened to evolve very quickly, but it's also one that we can mitigate very quickly as well, without waiting for the development of new technologies and without really tremendous monetary investment. Sometimes it can be as easy as just switching off your own porch light. We can get a little more sophisticated by changing out some of our light fixtures so that we are in compliance with principles of smart lighting, where that light is directed only where we need it and it's on only at the times that we need it. And then even easier, we can start to think about any future installation of lighting and maybe develop some personal commitments to addition of light fixtures on our own properties, but also motivate the conversation at a municipal and even state level about how to consider changing out old fixtures to newer fixtures that are more efficient and less polluting. There are existing policies in the state of New Hampshire that deal with light pollution, and we can turn to some of these as templates for making change with our own communities. Not going to read the particular policies because I know we're running a little bit short on time, but I would mention that the International Dark Sky Program is also unveiling some new measures to help communities adopt smart lighting policies. And they even have some templates for initiating dark sky friendly lighting ordinance. There's remarkably few communities, in fact, only 38 communities nationwide that are certified as globally that are certified as dark places in the world. So there is lots of room here for growth, and there are a few models that we can look to for inspiration. The state of Arizona has recognized the significance of preserving their dark sky and its value for tourism. And I think that is something that might really resonate, particularly with communities in northern New Hampshire that depend on those dollars from tourism. There's all sorts of ways that you can get involved. And I think I'm going to stop clicking through my slides so we can spend our last few minutes really answering your questions. I will be quiet and I would offer the chat for any particular questions that you might want to invest our last few minutes in. And I would also say there is so much more to this, and I will certainly share additional resources to any of the research or projects that I mentioned this evening that will be available to you through Amanuset Conservation Trust. Thank you so much for disseminating all of that information.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll certainly collect all of the resources that you shared tonight and put them out in an email to everyone that's registered. So if you didn't bring your pen and paper with you, don't worry about it. We'll make sure that we send all of that off. As we wait for people to type their questions, I thought maybe going back to the Jamboard and just answering a couple of things that came up while we were thinking about it. So I'm just gonna go for the one that I see first. What are the ways it impacts human health that we might not realize? I know we've touched on that a little bit. Is there anything else that maybe we didn't discuss?
Yeah, I think we oftentimes don't even recognize the impact that light has on us. And unfortunately, particularly now in the screen era, we are constantly being disrupted with artificial light at night. And it's that blue light in particular, that light that emanates from all of our screens, that really disrupts our circadian rhythms and our hormone production. And I know you've heard about sleep hygiene and putting your screens away, but I also think it's really important to have some of those conversations with our younger generations, because our brain development is so strongly tied to that sleep pattern and our ability to turn off some of those hormones that are activated by the blue light in particular. So those screen time messages are so important. And I worry that our young people don't recognize the significance of just how disruptive it can be. It's not just about getting sleep, it's about allowing your brain to continue to fully develop.
Thank you for that. We did have a question come through while we were discussing. You mentioned students who had been studying light pollution at PSU these past 5 weeks. Can you talk more about what you've been doing with them?
Yeah, so we've been evaluating light fixtures right here on our campus. So the slide that I'm showing right now is a great example of light fixtures that are pretty typical of most main streets, and they are the same types of light fixtures that we have on our own campus. And they really are terrible as far as not directing that light down towards the ground where we actually need it. So some of the students the other day said, I'm never going to be able to unsee a bad light fixture. So now that they can recognize them, they see them everywhere. So looking at those light fixtures and then doing some of those sky quality readings has helped them start to contextualize the problem. Our next step with this group is to initiate some changes to the lighting on our campus. And this is the slide that I have up here now, because as soon as you say, maybe we should think about reducing the amount of light that we have on campus, the red flag that comes up for so many people is the idea of safety, and that if we change our lighting fixtures, we are somehow compromising safety. And that's a really common concern. But the research actually shows that the types of light that we have do not necessarily improve safety. And in fact, bad lighting can make us more vulnerable because it renders us unable to actually see. So that glare in particular is really disruptive for us being able to detect any sorts of threats on the horizon or immediately outside of the area that is actually being illuminated.
Thank you. You actually answered the question that came in while you were talking, asking to clarify how light can decrease safety. So thank you for that. I know I have some glare problems when I'm driving, so I can't imagine how I would be able to see outside of an area. So moving back to the Jamboard, as again, we continue to kind of wait for things to come in if anyone's got anything else. How bad does light pollution in urban areas affect the darker places on the earth? So is there any kind of spillover?
Yes, there is. So that's the thing about light and light trespass is, like, when we put it out there, it travels. And it travels depending upon the built landscape, also the topography of the landscape. But there are very few truly dark places left on our planet. And I can go back a couple of slides and look at that. So we have 201 certified dark sky places in the world. That's not that many. 115 of them are national parks, not necessarily within the US, but in other nations. And then we only have 38 communities. So most people are living in places that are light polluted. And we're just accustomed to it. We honestly don't know any different. So until we see truly dark skies, unless we've had an opportunity to go to somewhere like Arizona, or the nearest dark sky reserve is actually in the Great North Woods of Maine, nearest to us, we really can't appreciate just how dramatically different the landscape is now. So I don't know if I have directly answered that question, but our light pollution is at a global scale, and it is pretty much everywhere, and we're not protected from it.
Thank you. And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's not just large urban areas. We may not think of Littleton, New Hampshire, or Berlin as comparable to a place like New York City, but they still have very intense light pollution problems, even in these small towns in northern New Hampshire. And the real impacts depend on how much ability you have to protect yourself. So are you able to close your blinds and block that light at night? Are you able to grow trees in your yard to help block some of that light from trespassing onto your property? But none of us have the ability to protect ourselves from that sky glow, which is really ubiquitous at this point.
Yeah, so there are a couple of, I think, more direct questions, but I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We are at 7:02. I wonder if there might be an opportunity for you to collect the questions that we haven't answered directly and maybe follow up via email. So I'm happy to take a couple of days if you guys are willing to wait. And maybe next week we can send out some of the more specific questions. I know there's a lot in here about just how, as citizens as well as towns or individuals, we can really help to create these policies. There was also a question in here about sending information about the International Dark Skies to see how it's possible to become a dark skies community. So just looking for both kind of at home as well as wider community efforts that I think people are starting to really pay attention to. Thank you so much for bringing all this information. I think we've maybe just scratched the surface, so really appreciate that. And maybe we'll have you back hopefully in a year. Maybe we'll have some better news. But I just want to thank Rachelle and her students for pulling all of this together, and thank everybody that came today. I know we had a little bit of a slowdown at the beginning, and so we just really appreciate your patience, and have a great evening. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
I guess one more thing, if as you are leaving, you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll try to capture those as well.
So there is, of course, so much more to cover, and I'll be happy to send additional resources. And in particular, any of those community champions that are interested in seeing what sort of light pollution policies their town may have and maybe proposing some new ordinance. That's the area I am really interested in, because I see this as just such a huge opportunity to have some good news, as you mentioned, for in a year from now, or even less than a year from now.
Yeah, absolutely.